Well, I knew I was gonna get to this one eventually. I've alluded several times in the past that Season 4 is my least favorite season of Death Battle. Do I think it's a bad season? No, not really, but it's still very problematic. I see a lot of people calling this an improvement over Season 3, a statement I don't really agree with since there were not only less episodes I liked, but also more episodes I thought were bad. Another thing is that a lot of these episodes shared various issues that were very noticeable to me this time around, and even some of the good episodes would suffer from them. However, there are some things to be positive about with this season. It did have its high points, and also, it was the first season to use this updated look, which while it did come out of nowhere and was off-putting at first, it was ultimately something I stopped minding and got used to as time went on. It's also fitting that it changed when it did, as Screw Attack had finished merging with Rooster Teeth while this season was still ongoing, and having a new look really sells that this is a new era for the show, for better or worse. The merger itself also allowed Death Battle to be more consistently good than ever before, and it really shows in most of the seasons after this one. But you came here for Season 4, so you get to listen to me pick it apart. If this is your first exposure to Death Battle, then you might have a chance of getting into the series through this season. I know someone that did, but you'll have a better chance with their more recent stuff. But anyway, I'll be spoiling the outcomes of each and every episode that happens in the season. I'll have a playlist linked in the description if you're interested, and then we can see if your thoughts mirror mine. If you are familiar with these episodes already, just know that these are not ranked objectively worst to best, but rather my least favorite to favorite. With that out of the way, let's get started. What? Oh, sorry. Guess I must have dozed off there. I think it had something to do with the fact that I have to talk about this episode. Venom vs. Bane is so ungodly boring. I honestly think it's the most boring episode in the entire series. Save for Bane trying to break Venom's back being a neat little reference, I can't bring myself to care about anything that happens on screen, as a lot of it feels so dull and stiff. Not like it's easy to make much of it out in the first place because the lighting is too dark, which just adds more to the boring factor. Really, the whole animation just feels like it was sloppily put together. There are various times where it shows that one of the characters is about to do something, and the very next frame cuts to after it happens, and it gives the whole thing a rushed quality. And then there's this. That was Venom turning invisible, and then later, Bane grabs him by the tongue and he's not invisible anymore? Or was he ever invisible? Bane said he was invisible. God, this is so confusing, it hurts. And don't even get me started on the shaky camera. It actually nauseates me a little if I'm being honest, and it doesn't even make the parts it's used on that much more intense. Also, that's not Venom. That is Carnage somehow taking the shape of Venom right down to Cletus Cassidy cosplaying Eddie Brock. I say this because that's how he was portrayed in the script, and it even goes right down to how he sounds. Adam Winnick did a fine job, but the alterations make him sound closer to Carnage than Venom. But then Bane was handled perfectly fine, and I think Chris Guerrero was on point with his performance. I genuinely don't know how that happened, where one character was portrayed just fine, but the other was portrayed like a different character entirely. At least they learned from this when they brought Venom back a few years later. As for the death, well, I like the concept at least. Venom pinning Bane to a wall and filling up his head with so much symbiote that it explodes was a great way to end the fight. In execution, the problem for me is that it's hard to look at it actually happening and see it as his head getting filled up. It's always looked like the symbiote was getting pulled out of his head than anything because it's going in too fast. Everything else was fine, so I guess it was an okay death overall. While I still dislike Deadpool vs. Pinkie Pie and Mewtwo vs. Shadow more, just for the sole reason that I'd rather be bored out of my mind than cringe so hard it hurts or get annoyed as all hell, I genuinely believe this is one of the worst episodes they've ever done, and it's my third least favorite across the whole series. And this is the YouTube version I'm reviewing. Believe me when I say to avoid the version on Rooster Teeth like the plague. It is the most bored I have ever been when watching a death battle, as all the negatives in this version not only carry over, but are also worse, especially with how boring it is. It's astounding that it's not the absolute worst episode they've ever done, and all I want to do is, We really couldn't have let Tracer vs. Scout be the worst 3D animation on the show, now could we? Thor vs. Wonder Woman had a lot of good set pieces that were massively bogged down in execution due to the animation feeling unfinished. Now, I get that it had the same rendering problems Hulk vs. Doomsday had, but look at how that fight turned out. It was amazing. This, however, there were so many problems caused by the render farm that I absolutely feel that they should have waited to do this one, or at least have made the set pieces not far too ambitious for the technology they had at the time. Most of the effects are just non-detailed polygons that they try to pass off as effects, and the streaks are also lacking in detail, and it just looks so bad. And we're just scratching the surface here. The lightning here just looks weird since it only takes 2 shapes, and... Okay, how come the tornado in Thor vs. Raiden, a 2D episode, had a 3D tornado that looked so much better than the one in the 3D episode? No, seriously, what the f*** is this? There's some other issues with the tornado scene too. Like how Diana stands on a rock that blends in with a tornado so one could reasonably mistake that for her standing on thin air. Or her invisible jet. Also, this part right here just straight up isn't fully rendered, and I'm pretty sure I saw Thor taking steps when he's clearly supposed to be floating. Even after the fight leaves the tornado, we're still not free from issues. I genuinely cannot tell what's supposed to be happening here thanks to bad effects. The wiki says it's a force field, and if it's true, is it really supposed to move that slowly? At least the moon exploding feels impactful, but when its chunks fall down to Earth? Okay, those are just straight up Boba Fett vs. Samus explosions. I shouldn't be able to compare explosions in a Season 4 episode to the one that happened in the very first one! I genuinely think these are the worst looking explosions in the history of the show. And the death is awful.
Why?
You're not worthy.
I didn't edit any of that. Those awkward cuts are in the episode, and it makes the whole thing jarring. Even if they weren't there, the way Thor goes out feels so unceremonious and lame for someone like him. At least slice him after telling him he's not worthy, make it look flashy or something. Instead, we get one of the worst kills in the series and by far the worst in the season. I'm also not a fan of the voice acting for either character. The performances felt underwhelming just from both characters sounding off, save for a few lines though, but even still, nothing leaves a huge positive impact on me. For as bad as this episode is, there are some things I can still be positive about. The Warrior's Madness segment is genuinely cool, though why does Thor have whiskers? And so was having Diana thrown in for a loop back at the Tornado segment, as it was a pretty good use of Mjolnir. Also, Thunder of Wonder was a good backing track and a good first impression from Therwolf Media, who would become a regular composer for the show and eventually does fantastic work after this. It's a shame that his debut just had to be in such a terrible episode. One of the similarities between these two is that they're worthy of being called gods, but as far as I know, this episode is only worthy of being skipped. There's really only 2 things I can use to describe this fight accurately. Forgettable and wasted potential. Imagine taking Sub-Zero vs. Glacius, a very popular matchup that happens to involve 2 ice users, and making it into one of the most boring and bland episodes in the entire series. I guess for positives, the bad online username joke in the analysis was pretty funny, and the ending was cool with Sub-Zero doing the iconic spine pull fatality and the fake out beforehand, and Glacius' skull falling off his spine was a neat touch. And that's basically it. While I did just say that I liked the ending, it's heavily drawn back by the fact that it's attached to a fight that only lasts a single minute long. Legit, Season 3 never went that low, even with its shortest fight at least having an extra 30 seconds. This was just shameful. The animation doesn't even justify the short length. It's very unmemorable and slow, and I feel bored watching it. You'd think a battle between ice users would have some cool moments with some beautiful effects, but this is just bland. Hell, even the background is just some generic snowy area, and why is Glacius' ship a recolor of Samus's? It's not like we don't know what it looks like, and it's right there in his map, so why not just draw their best interpretation of it? And finally, the sound design is really inconsistent. Some hits sound like they have too much impact and others have too little, and even the voice clips are inconsistent in volume. Hell, I actually had no idea the Killer Instinct announcer made an appearance to say Combo Breaker when I first saw the episode because he was too quiet. We also got another instance of the team using Test Your Might as the main argument for why Sub-Zero is stronger. I failed to mention in the Season 3 video that it's not the best way to determine a character's strength, as it very often doesn't sell how powerful a character actually is, and in some cases, oversells. Though I still have no idea if it's canon to the lore or not, and I cannot be bothered to check since it wouldn't change the placement of this episode either way. It's a bad episode and that's all there is to it. Believe me, you'll get way more out of the other two ice fights they were due years later. While I had Zoro vs. Urza at the 4th best spot of the Season 3 list, this one I'm also gonna have to call the 4th worst of this season. I tried with this one, I really did, but Natsu vs. Ace was another fight I found to be riddled with issues. The action is nothing special, and it's bogged down by close-ups that didn't need to be there, and half the time they feel out of place. Some of it is just taking clips straight out of the anime, and I can't help but feel as if corners were cut here. But the stuff that is hand-drawn actually does look fine, so there's that at least. The voice acting was a mixed bag too, as Beautiful Valentine sounded fine as Ace, but I genuinely cannot stand to listen to Howard Wang's Natsu. He's a good actor, don't get me wrong, but the raspy voice and underwhelming performance makes this by far his worst showing. As for the choreography itself, I found no substance in any of it, and a lot of it goes by way too fast for my liking, though the use of silhouettes here was nice. It's also 2 minutes long, and it feels like it, just from the feeling of it ending too quickly. And perhaps my biggest issue is how quickly Natsu activates his strongest form. Yeah, because Ace being made of fire is apparently grounds for him to go all Fire Dragon King mode on his ass 30 seconds into the fight. Why did they feel the need to bring that out at the start? Why weren't his other forms used besides Lightning Fire Dragon mode? I know Natsu's supposed to be an idiot, but still, it genuinely feels like there was some wasted potential by doing what they did. Another issue I have with it is the music feeling too low energy and generally not appropriate for what really should have been a hype moment. Usually when a character activates their strongest form, the music fits the scenario, not to mention the animation gives a good amount of time for it to really sink in. But here, there's none of that, so I'm just left thinking, oh wow, Fire Dragon King mode. Woo. I'm also gonna go out and say that I didn't like the Kirby sound effect used for Natsu eating the fire, as it was distracting and not in a good way, hence it took me out of the fight. As for the death, I like it. It's a pretty nice use of the aforementioned Lightning Fire Dragon mode, and the graphic close-up of Ace's face melting a la Raiders of the Lost Ark was pretty awesome, though I wish we got more time for it to really sink in, so I think I'm gonna say that Urza's death was better. Also, I think the discovery of fire conducting electricity should have been in the episode instead of just the commentary, so it's not confusing to the normal viewer as to how Natsu could force Ace out of his intangibility. Overall, this was a big disappointment for me, seeing as it was the fight I was looking forward to the most in the season. I genuinely wanted to like this one, but as it is, there's no justification for me to put it any higher than this. I sometimes find myself forgetting this episode exists, and going back to it for this list, I think I know why. It's very underwhelming. It should come as no surprise that I didn't like Lucario vs. Renamon. The animation is fine. Not much sticks out that's notably positive or negative, though it has its good moments, but I'm also taken out of it by most of the sound effects being on a low-quality mono setting, and Renamon's voice acting is among the worst in the series. The analysis isn't free of issues either. While I do like the editing here this time around, I'm also not a big fan of the jokes, and the one where Boomstick finds a piece of artwork of a sexualized Renamon is genuinely one of the most unfunny and forced jokes they've ever put into an episode. Now, back to the fight, what else can I really say? I mean, other than, oh god, the death is super abrupt. Like, Pikachu versus Blanca levels of abrupt. God, again with the Season 1 comparisons. There is nothing about the barrage of attacks Lucario dishes out that tells me that it was gonna end the fight, especially since we were only a minute into it. And yeah, that's how long the fight lasts. From the moment the fight graphic shows up, Renamon fucking dies a minute later, and all that does is throw all the potential this fight had out a window, especially with how abrupt the ending is. Also, Renamon doesn't even turn into Data upon dying, and that genuinely bothers me. I'm fine with her bleeding, but like, I'm pretty sure it's been established since the beginning that all Digimon turn into Data upon dying. I'm genuinely surprised this isn't the worst death in the season. At the very least, after this episode happened, they clearly realized that 1 minute long fights don't work, and they stopped doing them afterwards. Now, if only they could one day realize that 2 minute long fights are very often dead on arrival too. I don't have anything else to say for this one. It's an underwhelming, mediocre episode. Moving on. Quite honestly, gag episodes just don't do it for me. There's good ones, and Season 2 had those, but then there's several bad ones, like Deadpool vs. Pinkie Pie or Bieber vs. Black. This one found a sweet spot in the middle where I can call it an okay episode. Smokey Bear vs. McGruff the Crime Dog is a bizarre matchup that they did confirm would happen at some point, and now that it did, well, probably a good thing I wasn't particularly hyped for this one. I want to give props to the analysis first, as it has some really good jokes that make me laugh each time, though special credit goes to the Berry pun counter, where Wiz and Boomstick try to see who can make the most bear puns in the episode. My favorite part of it is Boomstick coming back at the end of the post-analysis with one last bear pun for his ending pun to break the tie from Smokey's rundown, and ultimately beating Wiz in the pun war. I said in the Season 2 video that and Diarrhea joke foot is my third favorite joke in the series, but now I'm thinking it's this. It's genuine comedy gold. This is also, however, one of those rare instances where the analysis carried the episode because the fight itself is not great. As far as positives go, it's the first fully hand-drawn episode, and Blind Ferret made a great first impression with the overall quality. While I personally feel that they overhyped the voice acting quite a bit, I still think Chris Sabat and Chris Rager did alright jobs voicing Smokey and McGruff respectively, and the death is a nice tug at the heartstrings, especially with McGruff's last line. But then there's the main issues I have with this one. It was kinda boring overall, with a lack of any real substance outside of the gags, and they honestly could have been funnier. It also feels like it ended too quickly, making it all the more believable that it only lasts for a minute and a half. And while I like the idea of the sound design being significantly cartoonish in this fight, it actually gets a little obnoxious in execution, and a lot of the hits don't have the impact they should. So yeah, outside of the pun war, this is not an episode I'll be coming back to anytime soon. It's not bad, but not good either. What more can I really say? After Season 3 dropped off in overall quality midway through and ended off with such a sorry excuse of an episode, I didn't really have a lot of high hopes going into Season 4. With this matchup as the premiere, it seemed promising for sure, but as the final product, it was not terrible? Lara Croft vs. Nathan Drake had some things going for it, but it also has a lot of flaws. For positives, there were some cool set pieces to appreciate, like how partway through, the temple starts falling apart and shows off Nathan's ability to jump really far, and the shot of it collapsing from the outside is fantastic. There are some other kick-ass moments like it here and there, which is always nice. It also has a cinematic feel to it, and it's something I can always appreciate since that's what made fights like Snake vs. Sam and Joker vs. Sweet Tooth that much better for me. However, just because a fight is cinematic doesn't automatically mean it's good. The gunplay at the beginning is nice, I like it, but after the fight leaves the temple and it turns into hand-to-hand combat, it feels pretty underwhelming, especially compared to previous episodes. And speaking of the temple, what is up with the lighting in it? I know that's what's making Nate look super off, by the way, because his model is just fine otherwise. At least Lara's model doesn't have this problem and actually looked fine throughout, save for a few moments with her shoulder. As for voice acting, Eileen Montgomery as Lara sounded fine, but then coming off of voicing Lex and Sweet Tooth, Gianni's Nate does not do it for me. The voice is fine, but the inflections leave a lot to be desired. I also have my issues with the writing. There are many times where Lara could have very easily killed Nathan, but then just doesn't for some reason, and it's pretty obvious when you think about it for even a minute. And then there's this part where it's clear that she's the one who shot the treasure off the pedestal, but she blames Nathan for it. I get that it's hard to think rationally in the heat of the moment, but still, the writing there just makes her out to be a complete dick. Also, the ending is ass. Yeah, because Nathan flying away with both characters living at the end was totally an option for the show. One thing I do like is how it shows off Lara's axe helicopter feat, but then it ends in Nate getting unlucky with where the helicopter blade fell, and it feels super abrupt and unceremonious. Why not just have him die to his injuries from the fall? Why not have Lara much worse off than just a cut on her arm so we could think she could succumb to her injuries instead? Which would actually justify the helicopter's existence more. Obviously, that wouldn't happen if she was declared the victor, but it would get the viewer thinking that it could. Also, having the death be a metaphor for Nate's luck running out was a dumb decision, as it just screams controversial, and I'm pretty sure that's the kind of thing you want to avoid generally. This fight has its moments, sure, but there's enough holding it back that I can't call it good, unfortunately. There's something I should really emphasize with this one. I'll talk about it later, though. Metal Sonic vs. Zero wasn't great in my eyes, but it certainly wasn't terrible either. I like how fast the action is overall, but at the same time, it can very often feel too fast. Like, it's sometimes hard to tell what exactly is going on because the animation is hard to keep up with, and this scene is straight up missing frames, and it's in a 2-minute long fight. Though, to this one's credit at least, it doesn't actually feel like it's that short, as there's a lot that makes it feel bigger than it actually is, similar to Zoro vs. Urza. It's especially helped by the fact that both use a good amount of their arsenals and their various forms are given a good amount of time to shine. For the most part, anyway. As for animation quality, while it has its hiccups, it was pretty good overall, and the 3D close-ups transition surprisingly well with the sprites. Not perfectly, as it can still look off at times, but I give it a thumbs up anyway. And then there's the thing I want to emphasize, as it's my biggest issue and why I can't bump this into at least decent. The sound design is some of the absolute worst in series history. Most of it feels off-sync from the animation, and hardly any of it has the impact it should. Here, let me play some examples. I think that last one speaks for itself. I could show more examples, but then I'd basically play the entire fight with audio. Actually, wait, there is one more I can talk about since it appears as if Metal Overlord has suffered from Fire Dragon King Mode syndrome. The music did nothing to even try to give off the feeling I should have when watching Metal Sonic become Metal Overlord. The actual cutscene gave off a sense of dread and an oh shit vibe once he was done transforming, and it was something I've always liked there. Here, though, you could replace the actual sound with cricket noises and I'll feel the exact same emotions. In fact, I think I've made myself clear. And the death is there, I guess. They both stop time and Zero cuts Metal vertically, without a sound effect for the slash, and it's pretty weird, though the explosion in last frame is cool. I don't get how Metal's head stayed intact in the aftermath, though. This fight had the potential to be really good, and if the sound design was better, and if it were longer overall, it would have absolutely been much higher. Fitting that we're at the top half of this list now, and we're just now getting into the episodes that I like. At least a little bit, though. Android 18 vs. Captain Marvel was a pretty decent episode. Not good, but decent. Considering this is the first episode Zack animated after taking a break during Season 3, and after doing that spectacular Broly vs. Doomsday DBX episode, the animation quality was pretty sky high and among the best 2D animation in the season. Well, at least at the beginning, but I'll get to that later. The pacing is good and the action is pretty fun to watch. It's two characters flying around at high speeds for crying out loud, and even before Carol is on screen, is it still fun seeing just 18 flying around. The hand-drawn stuff is also pretty good, albeit just white and red blobs, but the shot is meant to be seen from a distance, so it works. The sound design is pretty impactful, and the voice acting from Amber Lee Connors reprising 18 from the DBZ Abridged series and Terry Doty as Captain Marvel is pretty good. Now, it all seems well and good, but remember, I said that it all drops off later, and it's when Carol goes binary. God damn it, it's Fire Dragon King Mode syndrome again! I hate it when the season does this! Playing unfitting, low-energy music over these transformation sequences when they should have had more substance! You had one job! Tangent aside though, that's really just the least of the issues, because holy crap, Binary looks awful. Not only does nothing resemble the original sprite, but also, it looks like Carol has a hole in her head with fire coming out of it, and it looks bad. It takes me out of the rest of the fight, and even the action takes a dive afterwards. I like the set piece of all the rocks falling, but I can't help but feel a tiny bit underwhelmed in execution. 18 breaking Carol's bones as a reference to when she did the same to Super Saiyan Vegeta was also a cool idea, but it just looks jank to me. It did make for some nice build-up for the killing blow, though, where 18 kicks a hole deeper than the one from the transformation, apparently. Though, why doesn't Carol's body go limp afterwards? Always bothered me. Oh, and also, there were some research flaws regarding 18's speed and whether or not she could absorb energy, and the latter slipped into the animation, so yeah. So overall, pretty good first 2 minutes, but meh last minute. Not so bad that it pulls it back into just okay, but enough that it's only decent. Still, I don't think I'm gonna go out of my way to watch this again. We've entered the future! And it's an episode I only thought was okay when it first came out, but nowadays I'm more comfortable calling it decent. Batman Beyond vs. Spider-Man 2099 had some enjoyment value to me for what it was worth. For one, I thought most of the jokes in the analysis were pretty funny, and the animation, while not spectacular, was still alright. The action was pretty good while they were still in the air, and it even felt somewhat fast. The voice acting from both Stephen Fu and Todd Haberkorn as Terry and Miguel respectively is pretty good, and I can say the same for Kent Williams and Alex Moore as Bruce Wayne and Lila respectively. Yeah, both characters had assistants to help them in the fight, and you might already know that I like it when fights do something like this, but here, it's really just bare bones and isn't utilized much, and the length does it zero favors. This was another 2-minute long animation that could have been bigger and better, but Season 4's got a Season 4, I guess. But back on the positives, though. I do like this shot of them falling with the 3D building, as it's pretty dynamic, and the original track, Beyond 2099, was pretty good as a backing track throughout the fight, and on its own too. But after they touch the ground, we get some pretty jank animation that's not pleasant to look at, and it sullies the ending for me. The scene of Bruce's perspective is among the weakest hand-drawn stuff in the series, to put it nicely. And while Terry blinding Miguel is all well and good, his punching him is just janky, and Miguel blowing up doesn't even look right, and there's not enough time to let his death sink in. Do people even blow up that way? And talking about this now, I'm starting to wish we actually saw Bruce short out Lila on his end, since they even said in the post-analysis that it was the most likely outcome, so all we have to go off is that it happened off-screen and no one in the animation acknowledged it. And heading back into the air for a bit, there's sometimes this high-pitched noise that I don't see anyone talking about, and while it's not as bad as it could have been, it does still hurt my ears on a few rewatches. Yeah, I can see why this goes on the wayside for a lot of people, and I'm feeling the same way. But I can acknowledge this as a decent episode at least. Hard to ignore the missed potential though. Who knew that decreasing the bit count in this fight by 8 would help make it into one of the better episodes of the season? And I'd even call it good. Scrooge McDuck vs. Shovel Knight is an out-of-the-box matchup that doesn't sound like it would work, but it does, and it's absolutely helped by the 8-bit style. It's the only fight in the series to do this, and it sets itself apart from all the other 2D episodes in that aspect. Hell, even the sound design is entirely 8-bit, which does mean most of the hits don't feel meaty, but it's sacrificed for the retro aesthetic it was going for, and it surprisingly works. Though it's a one-and-done type of deal to me, so I don't think I'd want more like this one, especially since I personally prefer 16-bit graphics anyway. But to this one's credit, I like how emotive both characters are in the fight, even with the 8-bit limitations. And yes, Shovel emotes through his helmet. The fight is aesthetically pleasing, but it wouldn't mean much if the fight itself wasn't good, right? Well, you'd be right, but you'd also be dead wrong if you assumed that was the case of this fight, as it's pretty fun to watch and fast-paced too, and the hand-drawn stuff is really good and fits in quite nicely. While I wish we got a fight longer than 2 minutes so Shovel could use more of his relics and so the whole fight wouldn't feel like it ended too quickly, I also feel that what was here is serviceable. Hell, Shovel uses his fishing rod of all things for crying out loud. And the death is fantastic. It uses the one same move these two characters share into an absolutely brutal kill, and Shovel even gets killed by his own weapon. Not to mention, there's just something I find incredibly amusing about the Chipper as Hell DuckTales theme song being played over this brutal murder scene, and I can't place my finger on it. As for why I can't put this any higher besides the length, it can feel pretty repetitive with the same routine of Scrooge getting winded after Shovel slaps his shit being used at least 3 times, and friendly reminder that we had to wait 4 weeks for this to come out after Lara vs. Nate as opposed to the usual 3, by the way. Also, Shovel breaking in and robbing someone's house has always felt out of character to me. I've never played the game myself, but if even I can tell when a character isn't portrayed correctly, then it's safe to assume you've done something wrong. I also feel like the part where they spell out the weapons Scrooge uses at the end should have been cut out, as anyone who's watched the analysis like myself would know what they were from the get-go. Not having it would only confuse those who didn't watch the analysis, and that would be on them, not Death Battle. And by the way, when I ask for fights to be longer, I mean have another scene with the two fighting where another ability or feat of strength could be shown off, not blatantly pad out the video. Oh well, this is still a good episode, even with its problems. Just not as good as everything I have higher than this, though. Tackling a shonen rivalry as big as this matchup was pretty ambitious for the show, especially this early on. Though, as the final product, I think it ended up as something pretty solid. Naruto vs. Ichigo was a thrilling episode from start to finish. The whole thing was incredibly fast and fun to watch, and it's boosted with the animation quality overall being pretty good. Sure, the saturation looks a bit weird and some of the parts are hard to follow, like what the hell is going on in this scene here? But the good outweighs the bad by quite a bit, as following up the confusing scene is a pretty funny one where this shadow clone of Naruto decides to turn into an anime girl and strip naked for Ichigo-sama. Going to the analysis for a bit, it's the first to include these tabs in the upper right corner of the screen, which can offer some trivia that doesn't need to be said verbally, and can also answer questions that people might have that may not have taken precedence in the script. It's a handy function that I'm glad stuck around. Back to the animation though, and there's some hand-drawn stuff here, and it fits in really well, as barring the shots of Kurama from early on, it's all really high quality. Tell me with a straight face that this shot of Ichigo here isn't very well done. While Shonen Showdown is one of the weaker original tracks in the series in my opinion, that doesn't mean it's bad. Far from it actually. It makes a good backing track and it's a sweet tune on its own as well. The voice acting is great too. Dawn M. Bennett does a fantastic impression for Naruto, and Ichigo is practically one-to-one with how he sounds in Bleach. In fact, it's speculated that Johnny Young Bosch reprised his role here. I also just feel like there's some good writing here too, like how Naruto isn't able to see Ichigo at the start, but can still at the very least sense him, and then is able to outright see him once he goes into his tailed beast mode. It's conveyed well in the animation too, and it's a touch I've always really liked. Oh yeah, I feel I should mention that both characters have many different forms, which does make this a little disappointing that both only use 4 each throughout the whole fight, and some are just outright skipped, like how apparently Ichigo goes straight to Mugetsu from True Bankai instead of Dangai, which I guess can be considered an issue with the writing, but I still think it made for a serviceable animation. And the death here is one of the most over-the-top the series has ever done. Ichigo loses his powers after using Mugetsu because, of course, and he doesn't care. He picks up a stick to try to fend off Kurama, while he creates an explosion that can be seen from orbit and absolutely decimates Ichigo. Damn, what a fantastic finisher. A nice way to include Luffy in the aftermath, by the way, and also provide more Chuck vs. Segata. While I don't think this episode is quite there at greatness, it was still a fun watch throughout. Even if it was a great episode, these next 4, however, have achieved excellence. As a matter of fact, these next 3 are actually interchangeable depending on how I'm feeling, so this isn't entirely set in stone. Power Rangers vs. Voltron is the season's obligatory badly titled episode. Seriously, the Rangers are fighting using the Megazord, why? I think we all know what this episode should have been called. Megazord vs. Voltron was an absolutely fantastic episode. When it's not feeling exhilarating, it feels awe-inspiring instead. And sometimes it's both. Hell, I actually think I'm gonna talk about the negatives first, finally. While the mechs themselves look fantastic, the human models do not. I can actually see the polygons on the Rangers, and everything about the Paladins looks super uncanny. And like Thor vs. Wonder Woman, there are these streaks and effects that look so unfinished, it takes me out of the fight. None of the rings needed to be there if that's how they were gonna look in the final product. There's also the voice acting, which is hit or miss for me, not helped by the fact that anyone who isn't Jason or Keith only has 2 to 4 lines each, and there's one character I'll touch up on later. You know the one if you've seen the episode. And that's it for negatives, everything else is great. Barring the bad effects, the action and choreography is really great here, with a bunch of moments that I really liked, so excuse me if I want to gush for a little bit. I loved seeing Voltron pile driving the Megazord, it's super impactful and feels awesome. The part where their swords clash is just as great too, seeing as they both serve as the power sources for their respective mechs, and the awkward moment that happens afterwards is comedy gold. I also loved seeing the two mechs forming side by side. It was very well done and felt super awesome. And given that both mechs are piloted by 5 characters each, that alone makes the fight feel super dynamic, even with the shoddy voice acting. And the original track, Stronger Together, gets my blood pumping every time I rewatch the episode. It's a fantastic backing track. It can feel a little repetitive on its own, especially given that the Power Rangers influence is a bit much compared to the Voltron influence, but it's still something worth listening to. It's actually my second favorite original track in the season, if I'm being honest. And the death at the end is top tier for me. The Voltron Force pushes themselves out of the corner the Rangers put them in and blasts them with everything they got. And remember when I said that I'd touch up on a certain character at some point? Yeah, MatPat as Keith is one of the weaker performances in the episode, but when he yells everything before decimating the Megazord, it genuinely gives me chills. Yeah, I'm not afraid to admit that a line delivered by MatPat gave me chills. And all the while, Pidge is grabbing the sword his team lost earlier in the fight by himself, and when he comes back, there's this really awesome sword slash that causes the Megazord to explode, and it's glorious. And can I have this last frame here as a poster on my wall, please? Man, this fight was really freaking awesome, and definitely worthy of the 75th episode milestone. It's also a breath of fresh air for me, especially since it's in close proximity to a lot of subpar episodes. But enough talking about them for now. Let's talk about the episodes I have higher than this. Oh hey! Another 2D episode that far outclasses the others in its season. Shredder vs. Silver Samurai blew my expectations away, in the sense that I was feeling fairly pessimistic at the time and wasn't expecting much from this episode, but boy am I glad that this was something I've always appreciated, and I'm super happy that this still holds up now. I'm gonna get the negatives out of the way. 2 minutes long, and there are parts of the animation that are janky looking. The trees Harada cuts through just disappear in this shot, and here, the mutagen drops just appear on the ground, and Shredder's transformation into Super Shredder is so goofy looking, I can't take it seriously. Also, the fire spreading here looks like there's frames missing, but anyway, the fight's awesome besides those issues. It's how I feel about Zoro vs. Urza, where the fight could have been longer, but what's there is so good, I just stop caring. For one, it feels fast throughout, and it makes this a joy to come back to, and the original track, Shredding Silver, absolutely helps with that as a backing track. I just wish the version we got on its own wasn't altered from it in a way that lowers the tempo or is slower. Hell, the reason you're hearing the version used in the fight is because it actually isn't. I took the version that's available and made it as close as I could to how it sounds in the fight. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in listening to it. Oh, by the way, this is the first episode to start using licensed music from Audio Network in the analysis, as using soundtrack from the actual source material started to have some annoying repercussions for the team, but on the plus side, almost every fight after this has an original track, and most of them are bangers. Back to the fight itself. The hand-drawn close-ups are really high quality here. Not a single drawing here looks off to me in the fight, and it all flows naturally. While there are voice clips in the animation, neither character says anything throughout the fight itself at all, but instead, you get to actually see the thought processes of both characters as they're fighting. It gives this episode a unique feel compared to everything we've been getting as of late, which isn't to discredit those episodes. Most of them are great in their own ways. It's just something that works for this matchup is all, and it's not something that would work for most others. There's also this tension here too, where both could one-shot the other, and it leaves you asking yourself who could land the killing blow first. Well, until Silver stabs Shredder and it proves futile. There's the dumb-looking Super Shredder transformation, and there's this shot of Harada deflecting Shredder's lightning, and it looks so freaking good! Sets the whole forest on fire, yada yada, and the death is the best of the season. Bet you weren't expecting that if you weren't up to date on their social media. What I love is how absolutely brutal it is, and that last line from Shredder is chilling. There's also enough time to let Harada's loss sink in, and it really hits it home for me on how fantastic this ending is. Also, gotta love in the aftermath where Harada dies again, and meanwhile, Shredder appears to have some sort of respect for his fallen opponent. Once again, a clear domination on what the best 2D episode in the season is in my eyes. I don't know what to say that doesn't outright repeat what I said at the end of my Zora vs. Urza segment. It's once again just really nice seeing one sprite fight be this good while the others range from just good to bad. Season finales up to this point have been episodes that have a deep special significance to the show and or the community, more so than most other episodes. Goku vs. Superman was one of, if not the most popular versus matchup on the internet, and still is, and hell, it was the most popular request at the time. Red and Charizard vs. Tai and Agumon was when Pokemon and Digimon collided for the first time on the show, and which franchise was superior was a hotly debated argument on the internet. Deadpool vs. Pinkie Pie was a garbage concept with a garbage execution, and it should have never been greenlit in the first place. Yes, I know it was the finale as a victim of circumstance, though I still would have hated it even if it was a mid-season episode, and I feel that it was when Death Battle hit rock bottom for me. And coming to this episode, anyone who disagrees with Link vs. Cloud 2012, Yang vs. Tifa, and Dante vs. Bayonetta would get some satisfaction from this one? That's all I've got. Yeah, this isn't really a matchup that was really deserving of being the finale, as it doesn't hold a deep significance the way other finales did, whether it's positive or negative. Though I guess I should stop complaining because Sephiroth vs. Virgil is awesome. Not a favorite, but I still love it. My only issues are that Mark Soskin as Virgil, while sounding great with some deliveries, also sounded off in others, especially Stop Wasting My Time. While his model was fine, there are times where Virgil looks fat. I don't know how else to describe it. As well as the fact that they just straight up put Final Fantasy VII gameplay footage in the fight instead of just animating that part of the supernova. It's quite jarring to me, and it feels like cutting corners. You can imagine that everything else is fantastic, given that we're this high up now. Cameron Nicot as Sephiroth was spot on for George Newbern, and his acting was fantastic in general. While the non-detailed streaks are back, just from the fact that they're all different colors to match the weapons they're attached to, instead of taking me out of the fight as normal, it actually enhances the fight by making it a lot flashier and more visually appealing, ways that I wouldn't expect from the streaks given their track record of making me wish they weren't there to begin with. So yeah, animation quality good, and the fight itself was fast-paced through and through, and that fight with the clones and the effects for Virgil's Judgment Cut is just And it's all helped by One Winged Devil being my favorite original track in the season. It gives this sense of grandeur that this is the season finale, and gets the blood pumping. It's also a great backing track, being as high energy or low energy as needed for every moment, and fits both characters really well. But it's hard to talk about this episode without at least bringing up the supernova. While there's a lot of debate on how exactly it works, I think they handled it well in the analysis. In the animation, I already explained my grievances with the gameplay footage, though the interface being for Virgil is a nice touch, but I think the way it was revealed was pure genius. Those clothes from earlier? Those were just illusions to distract Virgil so Sephi could heal himself while also preparing Supernova, while also hiding the fact that he knew that Virgil could cut through dimensions. And when Supernova actually hits Virgil, I mean, with the imagery combined with the screaming, it's a chilling moment, and it's pure awesome. And those burn marks on him afterwards just look great. All of it also makes for some fantastic build-up for the death. Virgil thinks he's free only for that sense of security to get ripped straight out of him as Sephiroth kills him. What a fantastic ending and one of the better deaths of the show. Overall, I think the quality of the episode itself is what made this worthy of being the finale, even if the matchup itself wasn't. Remember, this was interchangeable with the previous two entries, which makes number 1 all that more clear-cut. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about my overall thoughts on the season. Usually I do this in the number 1 segment, but there's enough here that warrants me doing it here. And I gotta say, wow, we really have fallen so far from the amazingness that was Season 2. So much so that I'm starting to question if my standards for death battles really were as low as I said in my other lists. While the 3D animations weren't as oversaturated as they were before, it also painted a clear picture as to how the 2D episodes were, for the most part, not even close to being as good as they were 2 years before. And hell, even the 3D episodes took a hit. Just look at those effects. And also, holy shit, the amount of short fights we got was absolutely disgusting. If you were counting, you'd know that I called out 8 of the 16 episodes, which is half the season by the way, for being too short. And only 2 of them were even good. So the argument that they sacrificed length for quality doesn't apply here. It actually felt like it was sacrificed for no good reason, and wasted the potential this season had overall. It's why my tolerance for animations on the show that are 2.5 minutes long or less is very thin, unless the quality is high enough to excuse it. I'll be honest here, this is the closest I had ever gotten to dropping the show outright. While Season 3 has my 2 least favorite episodes in the show, it also had some of the highest high points, something that was a scarcity in this season. While I do really enjoy numbers 4 through 2 on this list and can recommend them to anyone, the highest score I could reasonably give them is a 9, which is a good score, don't get me wrong, it just means the episodes are a point shy of a perfect score, but in the previous 2 seasons and every season after this, we'd have covered an episode I felt was a 10 out of 10 already. You know, come to think of it, this feels like a season of highs and lows, but its lows felt more prevalent as a good portion of their issues spread over to the other episodes, even ones I liked, and that's why I don't think of the highs as that high. It's why I can't bring myself to agree with the consensus that this is better than Season 3. It's why Season 4 is my least favorite season of Death Battle. But there is one more episode I have yet to talk about, and it's one I can consider a 10 out of 10 episode. So enough ranting, let's get on to that. Yeah, another Season 4 list, another time this is at the top spot. When this episode first came out, my initial thoughts on it weren't exactly fair, likely due to me feeling pessimistic about the show at the time, as well as some things going on in my personal life, also at the time. I feel really bad about it since looking back on this now, it's a genuine masterpiece. One of my all-time favorites in the series if I'm being honest, and the only episode of the season I could say that about. Hence, this is what I believe to be the best episode of Season 4. Balrog vs. TJ combo, a boxing match to the death between 2 characters with a shady history and 2 different ideals, and my god is it amazing. The choreography and animation is very well done, and is some of the best in the entire series. It starts as something that feels like you're watching an actual boxing match, with some reminders here and there that these are fictional characters. And then Balrog cheats and knocks out the referee, and out comes some batshit crazy action. And throughout the whole thing, you can feel the impact of every punch. Also, we finally got an episode that took place in a boxing ring. I've always wanted a death battle animation to take place in one, as it seemed like a perfect fit for the show, and especially for a matchup between 2 boxers. The fact that it happened in an amazing episode such as this made me really happy. Makes me wonder what would happen if they did another matchup with boxers. Hopefully it'll be as good as this one, who knows. I also like the voice acting here. Chris Jai Alex was perfect in capturing how unhinged Balrog is, and Gabriel Kunda also did a fantastic performance when voicing TJ. Chris Guerrero, being the fight and KO announcer, at least until Season 8, was really great as the MC for the fight, and there's some fun dialogue for him to work with. Really great voice acting all around. And then there's the music for the fight. While it is TJ's theme from the 2013 Killer Instinct game, it is an absolutely hype soundtrack that enhances the fight's quality in more ways than just one, and a perfect send-off for non-original tracks being used in the fights. And finally, the death. I love how TJ is backed into a corner and activates his instinct mode and absolutely beats the shit out of Balrog, even breaking his arm. It's not just a simple, oh, let's activate this character's strongest form and have them just win. No, we get 20 seconds of TJ comboing Balrog, and it's absolutely hype through and through and makes me want to root for him. My one issue is the music ending abruptly when he eventually decapitates Balrog, as it took me out of the ending a little bit, though at least we get the animation ending exactly like a live broadcast ending abruptly, which is a very nice touch. Aside from that, and some clipping issues with Balrog's cloak, this episode is flawless. It's not top 10 material for me, but it is a favorite, and is also my favorite episode of Season 4. Whew, glad to get this one over with. I guess with the way things are going, you could expect my Season 5 ranking video to come out sometime in August, or late this month. Nothing more to say here. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and comment what your list is. Until then.